And when I was younger, I was consumed with the idea of death. I'm a very anxious person. I don't know about you guys, if you've ever been an expert in something that you don't want to be an expert in. I'm an expert in anxiety because I lived it and I dealt with it very heavily. Like I said, as a young person, I was consumed with this idea of death. It would keep me up at night. It would cause me to have sweats, and my heart rate would increase a bunch, and I just wouldn't sleep, or I'd sleep with the light on, and I just like listen to things, turn up the white noise so I could actually finally fall asleep. And it didn't really go away going into my adult life. It just manifested itself in other ways. In fact, when I was on my honeymoon, we were flying into Salt Lake, not because my honeymoon was there. I was not doing that. We were on our way to Cabo San Lucas, and I remember flying in, and it was very dark. It was the first time I'd ever flown at night. And I was freaked out to fly because when I'm flying, I'm not driving. I'm not controlling the airplane. So it freaked me out because I don't trust the guy who's flying, even though he knows what he's doing. I was scared that we were going to crash. And I remember looking down as we started our descent into Salt Lake, and it was completely black because I think we're over the lake itself. It was just completely dark, like the darkest dark you've ever seen. So I had no idea where we were in relation to the ground. And that was something I like to do when we were landing on planes, is to know exactly where the ground is, because somehow I could, make sure everything was okay. It doesn't really work like that, but in my mind it did, because it was real. And so I couldn't see the ground, and all of a sudden I saw an airport below us. And I turned to my wife. I was like, Brianna, we missed the airport. We're going to die. Like, it's over. And I start freaking out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to die. We're going to die. This is bad. And finally we land perfectly fine at the actual airport we were meaning to go to. And this guy in front of me got up and stood up, and he was like, hey man, he was wearing like full army fatigues. And he's like, hey man, are you gonna be okay? And he wasn't like doing it in a friendly way. He's like, dude, you're a grown man, chill out. Like, what is wrong with you? And I wasn't even mad at the guy, because I'm like, listen, man, we almost died, and I was doing something about it in my brain, even though it wasn't helping anybody and just freaking out the people around me. But to me, anxiety was very real, and I know it's very real for a lot of you. If you don't experience anxiety, the chances are you know someone who does. The truth is that studies have shown that the average high school student today has the same rate of anxiety, or the same anxiety level, as that of a 1950s psychiatric patient. Let that sink in. The average high schooler today has the same anxiety rate as a 1950s psychiatric patient. Like, that's how anxious we are as a culture today, and that's freaky. This is a real issue that real people deal with every day. And this all happened, these were numbers all before the coronavirus outbreak. So you add that into the equation, I would be willing to bet that anxiety levels are just through the roof right now, and it's just ridiculously, it's just a huge issue. And what I've known about anxiety in my own life is that anxiety is a lot like a rocking chair. Like this one right here. Anxiety is like a rocking chair. See, we sit in this rocking chair, and with anxiety, it gives us something to do. It occupies our minds. It makes us feel like we're accomplishing something or doing something mentally to address the issue. But really, all it does is gives us something to do, and we're not actually going anywhere. And like I said, anxiety is fearing something that's out of our control, or that's unfounded, something that maybe isn't even real. Oftentimes, anxiety is like for me, in that airplane, like, we weren't going to crash. I didn't have any reason to think we were going to crash. Anybody who knows about airplanes would have known that there were no issues. It was a perfectly calm night. There were no problems with the airplane. Pilot was doing his job. Like, there's no reason to be afraid. But I was afraid. And anxiety also is caused by things that are out of our control, completely out of control, like death. I mean, death is a one-for-one ratio. Like, everybody who is born will eventually die, yet it consumes our thoughts and causes us a lot of trouble. There was this guy that hung out with Jesus. His name was Peter. And Peter, he was like the original pope. This guy was like the rock star early church starter. This dude had an incredible ministry after Jesus left the earth, but he wasn't without his issues. In fact, early on, he dealt with this issue that a lot of us deal with. We'll talk about it more in depth another day, but this issue of pride. And pride is basically this mentality that says that I got this, like I'm in control, I got this. And it really is a control thing. In every situation, pride says, hey, I got this. Even if you don't got this, Peter was there to say, I got this. And he was actually challenging Jesus, and Jesus was so gracious with him. Oftentimes in his ministry, he would challenge Jesus. He'd be like, hey, this is the way I think you should do this. And Jesus would be like, hey, listen, Peter, that's not the way it's going to go. And it even culminated all on one night, the night before Jesus would be crucified. Peter went to him and he's like, Jesus, Master, I'm going to follow you to the end of the earth. Like, whatever happens, I will be right there at your side. And he's like, I got this. I'm in control, man. I know I'm in control of myself. I got this. And Jesus looks at him and he just says, you know what? Before the rooster crows tomorrow, like, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter's like, no, I would never do that. No, I got this. Lord, I got this. And sure enough, he was faced by a woman, no less, in that culture, which she really wouldn't have had a leg to stand on if she were to go tell someone that, like, hey, I found this Peter guy. No one probably would even listen to her. And Peter says to her that he doesn't even know Jesus, because she comes up and says, hey, I've seen you with Jesus before, right? You're with that guy that's up there now in prison going to the cross. You know that guy, right? And Peter's like, no, I have no idea who he is. And there he goes. He denies him 3 times. But then after that, after he sees his friend go to the cross and eventually to the grave, resurrected, he completely changes, does a 180, and realizes, like, hey, I'm not in control, and that's okay. And he goes on to write some incredible letters to some churches. And we pick this up in 1 Peter chapter 5. Peter writes this. He says, all of you, which means every one of you, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because, now listen, so what he's saying, and you may be thinking, like, what does humility have to do with anxiety? We're going to get to that, trust me. Humility is the opposite of pride, which is what Peter was an expert in. He was an expert in pride. And humility is the opposite of pride, because pride says, I got this. Humility says, like, I can't. I'm not in control. I don't got this. So he's saying, he's like imploring us, urging us, like, hey, all of you, clothe yourselves, cover yourselves in this humility. And he says, because the reason why you need to do this is God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. And it's interesting, he's quoting King David here, and this quote that he's using in the word oppose is actually a military word, which means to come up against. So what he's saying is God actually comes up against and opposes those who have this I got this mentality, who have this I am in control, even though I'm really not. I'm going to make you think that I'm in control. God opposes people like that. He actually comes up against them and places himself in opposition to them. And so I don't know if you're a Jesus person or not, but the idea, at least agree with me, the idea of the creator of the universe coming up against and placing himself in opposition to you is scary. It'd be crazy to push forward at that point, right? But the flip side of that, and that's why Peter's saying, hey, clothe yourselves in humility. The flip side of that is that he shows favor to or grace to, an unmerited, undeserved grace towards people that are humble. People who say, I don't got this. I'm not in control. All that crazy anxiety stuff out there, like, I can't worry about that because I'm not in control and I'm okay with that. So Peter's like, because of that, you need to clothe yourselves in humility. That's so powerful. And he goes on to say this. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. So when you humble yourself, I think it's interesting to note that the humbling stance, the stance that says I can't or I don't got this or I'm not in control, it's not just that God gets out of the way and stops opposing you. He actually turns around and comes alongside you and propels you forward. It's not a one-for-one switch. It's not that he just doesn't oppose you. He actually comes and helps you, which again, let's just look at this objectively. The creator of the universe, the idea of the creator of the universe coming alongside and propelling you forward, that's something that we should all want. And then he goes on to say this. You're like, what does it have to do with anxiety? Listen, he says this, cast all your anxiety, all your cares, all your worries on him because he cares for you. Give everything, give over control. Give up and give over control of the things that you can't actually control, that you're just occupying your time on the rocking chair, rocking back and forth, worrying and caring and consuming your mind with things that you're not actually in control of, or you can't control, or that are going to happen anyway. Give those up because he cares for you. You may be thinking like, that's too easy. That's too simple. You think that I could just give up my anxiety. And as an anxious person, it's like, that makes sense. Because, I mean, really, the solution to anxiety is just to stop, right? Just stop being anxious. Has anybody ever told you that about your anxiety? My wife, who's a doctor, told me that all the time, and I'm like, I can't just stop. I got things to worry about. I got things to do. It's not that easy. But this sounds just as easy, and it's crazy to think about as an anxious person. Like, just stop. Just give it all to Jesus because he cares for you? Peter, what are you talking about? It can't be that easy. And really, when we look at it, and what I've known to be true is anxiety, so much of anxiety is us carrying something that we weren't meant to carry. And you can't do anything about that thing that you're carrying, and worrying doesn't help, and it just really makes it worse. And you think that you're addressing the issue by mentally focusing on it and being consumed with it, but it just actually makes it worse. It makes your life worse. I've heard anxiety being likened to a computer virus or malware, something that just kind of sits on your phone or on your computer and saps the productivity away, saps the energy away, and just makes life a little bit less enjoyable. And for some of us, it can be very consuming. It can really destroy your life and cripple you. I've dealt with crippling anxiety, and for some of you, it's very real, and it's a daily thing. And so the idea that you could just give it away, just give it to him because he cares for you, that seems too easy. But if you were to ask Peter, how do I know that Jesus cares about me? Or that where it says like, hey, cast it on him because he cares for me. How do I know that Jesus cares for me? Peter would tell you, when I was at my weakest point, I watched Jesus, my friend who I had just denied, go to the cross and give up his life for me, which really is the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate showing of love towards someone else, is giving of your own life for somebody else. So when you ask like, hey, how do I know Jesus cares for me? You just look at the cross. He died for you, which means he cares about you. And you may think, okay, well, that's great. He cares for me. Anybody could die for somebody, and that's true. That shows that they care, but anybody could die for someone. How do I know that Jesus can actually do something with this crippling anxiety that consumes me every day, or these worries that sometimes are there and sometimes aren't, that just take away from the joy in my life? How do I know that he even has the power to do something with my stuff? Peter would tell you 3 days later, after he watched his friend die, the very thing that we all fear, that we have no solution to, that nobody knows what it does or what to even think about it or how to address it, this issue of death. He defeated death. The very thing that will take every one of us couldn't hold Jesus. And he rose from the dead. He rose from the dead, showing that not only does he care about your stuff, but he has the power to do something with your stuff. And that's why Peter says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. You guys, this is too important to miss. This is next level stuff. Jesus wants you to give him all your stuff. You weren't meant to carry that anyway, just to give up and give over control to him by humbling yourselves and saying, hey, I'm not in control and I'm okay with that, like Peter did. Like so many people have done, like I have done, and so many people on my staff have done. And I've seen it work. And I'm not just telling you this because I read it somewhere. I've seen it work in my own life, and I want the same thing for you. Humble yourselves and watch God work in your life and take that anxiety away. You know, there's things like we talked about tonight that we're not in control of, or that we shouldn't even worry about. And it really encompasses this topic of control. But there are also things in our lives that we can control. And that's what we're going to be talking about next week. So join us next week as we talk about building resilience in this crazy, crazy, difficult time. I'll see you guys next week.